Good morning. Well, welcome to our electronic meeting this morning, our long distance meeting, and I thank everybody for putting this together. I'd like to call to order the State Board of Higher Education for October 27th, 9 o'clock a.m. via Skype. We are originating from Bismarck State College National Energy Center of Excellence. At this, I would ask for, we've already done a check of all the locations. So at this point, I'd like to ask Christy to call roll. Here.
Dr. Meliker?
Yes, present.
Mr. Steeman? Mr. Steeman? Mr. Evans?
Present.
Mr. Ness? Ms. Reichert? Mr. Hacker?
Here.
Mr. Wakeford? Mr. Wakeford? Dr. Piney?
Here.
ESC?
Here.
ESU? Lake Region?
Here.
Bayville? Minot?
Here.
DCP? NDSCS?
John is here.
NDSU?
Number of people from NDSU are here.
UND?
Here.
Valley City?
I'm here.
Williston State?
Okay, at this point, I'd like to, first off, this meeting was at one point scheduled to be at Dakota College Botno, and Dr. Migler, I see you over at Minot. Thank you very much for accommodating or being willing to accommodate you, the group, but, and also thank you for flexing with our plans. I'd also like to thank, sitting next to you, Dr. Shirley, because it appears as though our November meeting, it's later on the agenda, but we may be changing our agenda, or excuse me, our location of the November meeting. And Dr. Shirley, I'd like to thank you too for willing to host us and also to flex with plans.
Be happy to host you in the future.
Thank you. That will be exactly my thoughts on that as well. I'd like to thank the BSC IT crew, as well as all the IT crews at all the locations to assist us in conducting this meeting. You guys do a stand-up job. Thank you very much.
Distance here.
Sounds good. I'd also like to just make a comment. Last meeting we were at UND. We held our meeting at the medical school, beautiful facility. Good meeting, and I think I received one of the highest compliments for our board, and that compliment was that we were in town in Grand Forks, and an individual who is very in tune with the work of the State Board of Higher Education did not know that we were meeting. That means that we were not in the media. And I take that as a supreme compliment to the board, and I congratulate every one of us for doing our work, staying low key, and keeping our work strictly to business. And with that, I would like to thank each one of the campuses. As each one of the campuses flourish and do well, the entire system does well. And with that, we work towards student success. So once again, I'll remind everyone here that this is our goal, is to further the good of the students. At this point, I'd like to move on to the business of the board. Item number 1 would be approval of our agenda before us. It's been sent out ahead of time. If we can have a motion. First off, are there any additions or corrections to the agenda? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Motion to approve.
Thank you.
Second by Hacker.
Thank you. Christy?
Dr. Meliker?
Yes.
Mr. Hacker?
Yes.
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Mr. Morton?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman? Ms. Reichert? Mr. Ness? Board Chair Ness?
Yes.
Present.
Item number 2, minutes of the September 29th, 2016 meeting. The minutes were presented to us ahead of time. Are there any changes or corrections to those minutes? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the minutes from the September 29th meeting?
Meliker, approve.
Thank you. Second?
Second, Member Hacker.
Thank you. And Christie?
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Mr. Hacker?
Yes.
Dr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Seaman?
Yes.
Board Chair Ness?
Yes. On to board policy. Once again, we move this to the beginning of the agenda as it holds such a high importance with us. Item number 3 on the agenda is the first reading, Policy 506.1 regarding immunizations. I'll call on Richard Rothaus. Dr. Rothaus, if you can assist.
Yes, this policy revisions are mostly language cleanup. There are some details that have been removed from the policy because those live over in the procedure. Procedures are easier to adjust as things change quickly. The immunization policy requires immunization of all students. It does allow for the normal exceptions, students who cannot be immunized for medical reasons, students who have beliefs that preclude immunization. It accounts for tuberculosis testing as required by federal standards for international students. But there are no substantive changes to the policy. I would suggest that because it is predominantly language cleanup, it would be inappropriate to do first and second move this item.
All right, thank you. Any questions, comments, or discussion on the immunizations policy first reading? Hearing none, Mr. Vaughn, is it okay if we go through each of the first readings and approve them?
Yeah,
together?
that's fine.
Okay. Let's go on to item number 4, agenda item number 4. First reading policy 501.8 STEM loan. We'll call on Brenda Zastapol.
Actually, Madam Chair, I'm going to do that.
Tammy? Okay, thank you. Tammy Dolan will handle the item number 4.
Okay, this is just first reading of policy 508.1. It really is just cleanup language. It removes a section of the policy that is duplicated in the procedure. So it's just a cleanup. There's no other substantive changes.
Thank you. Any questions or discussion on the STEM loan policy first reading? Hearing none, we'll move on to agenda item number 5, first reading policy HR 24, reduction in force. We will call on Jane Grindy.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board, and guests here and far away. This request comes from the Human Resource Council. It predominantly lies in Section 8 of the policy as it refers to notification to those employees that were terminated through reduction in force. The HRC, currently the Human Resource Council shall maintain a list of employees to contact. The recommendation is that each institution would retain a list. From a location standpoint, that makes more sense. And then the second change would be clarifying the return to work services as a result of reduction in force. It's just a clarifying statement at the end.
All right, thank you. I do want to point out that in our digital files, there are links and there is supporting document for each one of these policies, and also as we go through our agenda. So everybody at all your locations, if you need to pause or ask me to pause at any time, let me know so that we can give everybody the opportunity to reference their policies and the pages that they're on in their electronic documents. At this time, item number 5, the reduction in force. Any discussion, questions? Yes, Dr. Ping.
I do have a question. Terminated employees under REF who are rehired would no longer receive services as defined under. Can you explain why?
Yes, thank you. In Section 8, items A, B, and C refer to some special service that these terminated employees would receive regarding assistance to find other employment, also extension of a tuition waiver. Item D clarifies if employees return or rehired, that those services would no longer be available to them.
Can you explain why not?
Because they would now be a permanent employee again of the system, and they would receive those benefits. And we would no longer look for employment for them.
Good question. Thank you. Any other comments or questions from the other locations? Hearing none, this is an item that we need to have action on, so I'd ask for a motion to approve agenda items 3, 4, and 5, which are the first readings of policy 506.1, 508.1, and HR 24. Is there a motion?
So moved, Don.
Thank you, Mr. Morton. Second?
Second, Nick Hacker.
Mr. Hacker, thank you. Christie?
Mr. Ness? Mr. Morton?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Dr. Melliker?
Yes.
Mr. Hacker?
Yes.
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Board Chair Nesset?
Yes. Thank you. Moving on, agenda item number 6 is second reading of policy 302.3, Budget and Finance Committee. We'll call on Tammy Dolan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is second reading of this policy. The change that was proposed and that you heard at the last meeting was to have any assessments from the system office out to the campuses for expenses, to have those approved by the board or by the Budget and Finance Committee before they are assessed to the campuses. During the meeting, there were questions about the number, the dollar amounts of some of those assessments, and should there be a cap put in it. So this version has been revised after discussions with the Administrative Affairs Council to say that any proposed campus assessments exceeding $10,000 would need prior approval from the Budget and Finance Committee. And that would allow us to do some of the more day-to-day type expenses that come in, the smaller things, but anything larger than that would need approval.
Thank you. This was worked through Budget and Finance Committee then?
Yes,
is
and
that
then
right?
it went back to Budget and Finance Committee for the second time, and they did recommend approval of it.
Thank you. Are there any comments or discussion on this second reading of policy 302.3? And just point out, we are on page 14 in our meeting materials, page 14. Okay. Once again, Mr. Vaughn, is it all right if we continue with no discussion going on, continue through these policies? One at a time? You prefer? Okay.
Madam Chair, if you don't mind, if we go one at a time at this point.
You bet. This is the second reading, so this is putting these into place. So the request has been to vote on each policy reading individually. So at this point, I'd ask for a motion to approve policy 302.3, second reading.
This is Steeman, so moved.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Melliker, second.
Thank you. Christie?
Mr. Morton?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Dr. Melliker?
Yes.
Mr. Ness? Mr. Hacker?
Yes.
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Board Chair Nesset?
Yes. Thank you. Agenda item number 7, second reading of policy 1200.1, Information Technology Consolidation Services. We'll call on Darren King and check what page that is in our agenda materials. What is it? 50? Okay, page 15 in our agenda materials.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. As we talked in the previous meeting, this policy is in response to North Dakota Century Code 151044.1 with the requirement that the university system provide centralized IT services for the campuses. It has not changed since the first reading, so I would present it and be open for more questions and discussion.
Thank you. Further discussion on policy 1200.1. Hearing none, I'll ask for a motion to approve the second reading for Information Technology Consolidation Services.
Move.
Thank you. A second?
Morton, second.
Thank you. Christie?
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Dr. Malaker?
Yes.
Mr. Hacker?
Yes.
Mr. Morton?
Yes.
Mr. Ness? Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Board Chair Nesset?
Yes. I'll just pause for a second to make sure everybody's with us as far as following along in their materials. Any questions? All right, thank you. Agenda item number 8, second reading, policy 1202.3, data privacy policy. Once again, we'll call on Mr. Darren King, page 16 in our materials.
Madam Chair, members of the board, again, second reading of this policy. This is part of our ongoing effort to review and update the policies that were previously in the 1900 series and then augment them. This policy has been developed through our information security group. It has been through legal review and our council has also reviewed it and pushed it on to this point. So with that, I would entertain and take questions or comments on this.
Thank you, Mr. King. Any questions or discussion on second reading data privacy policy? Hearing none, we'll ask for a motion to approve the second reading policy 1202.3.
So move, Member Hacker.
Thank you. Second?
Second, Nick Evans.
Thank you, Nick. And Christie?
Dr. Malaker?
Yes.
Mr. Morton?
Yes.
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Mr. Hacker?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Board Chair Nesset?
Yes. Okay, we'll now move on our agenda to board business. Agenda item number 9, tuition model and waiver definitions and reporting. There's a series of items, begins on page 17 on our board materials, and we'll call on Tammy Dolan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is an item that you heard at your June meeting somewhat, and we briefly talked about it at the last meeting. There has been a task force working on revising the tuition and fees and dealing with tuition and fees and waivers for some time, at least a year, and I think it's been going on before that as well. Right now, the tuition and fees task force has come to some conclusions of things they would like to consider increasing the rates. And if you look at your materials, well, here, first I'll give you an overview. There is the attachment in your materials goes through principle by principle of the current tuition model and the changes that the task force was making. If you'll recall, we were going to bring that forward for approval at the last meeting. However, when we went back after the Budget and Finance Committee, we realized there was a greater impact to the institutions and potentially to the students. Because in order to keep the revenue or the tuition, in order to keep the revenue neutral to the campuses, some rates would have to increase. And we went back and looked at these, and we believe these, are good changes to be making, but we need more time. We need more time to understand how we can make this revenue neutral without greatly impacting, particularly the rates to North Dakota students. And so, regarding the rates, if we are recommending approval of the changes that are in the packet on principles 1 through 5, and but we want a delayed implementation date of fall of 2019, which currently parts of it would go in fall 2017, others 2018. The reason we need that time is first to do that analysis, to come up with a revenue neutral solution that doesn't increase rates to North Dakota students, And second, before we can do that, with the uncertainty of the funding at the state level right now, we'd like to wait until after the legislative session to see what our funding level is, so that we have a complete picture before we do something that could be reducing revenue to our institutions at a time when they can't really afford it, and then as a result increasing rates to students. So we're asking for approval of the changes with a delayed implementation date of fall 2019. That's the first part. The second part that we can implement right now, we've been working on a series of data inconsistencies related to waivers, tracking of waivers, defining waivers. These were things that came up during performance audits, and also was part of the discussion during the last legislative session when the legislature directed us to fix data inconsistencies. So in your attachment, if you look at pages 10 through 15, and I hadn't spent a lot of time talking about that at the last meeting, so I just could walk you through that.
Can I just hold on just a second?
Absolutely.
When you say 10 through 15, where are we?
Okay, that is when you,
Modification?
can I have Christy explain how to get that?
If you open up the link in the background information,
Right.
those page numbers are on the upper right in blue.
Okay. Tuition fees and waiver study group document. Let me just pause a moment and make sure the rest of the locations are on the same page. We are in the supporting documents dealing with the tuition model, and within that, we are on page 10.
That's correct.
Okay, I just want to be sure everybody has the same information in front of them. Thank you.
So starting on page 10 is a summary of the review and the recommendations that the task force came to related to definitions of waivers. And it's not just waivers. You'll see on page 11 the common definitions that have been agreed to by the institutions, and dealing with discounts, waivers, stipends, and a number of things, so that when we put these in place, if you approve of this direction, we will go back, look at our policies and procedures, bring those to you again so that you have another approval. But this is something we can move forward with separate. We can do this now. We don't have to wait till fall of 2019. So this will allow us to increase our consistency of data immediately upon getting the procedures and all the proper coding in place. And that way all of the campuses would be using the same definitions and would be tracking everything the same. Additionally, that we would be instituting a new institutional waiver data form that's on page 15 of this attachment. So it's page 15 with the blue page numbers. This is something that would come to the board. All the campuses would use this to report to you all of the different waiver types that they are issuing. There's a number of everything from total amount that they're budgeting to be spending on these waivers, the criteria for receiving some of the waivers, and this is something that it's not necessarily an approval form, it's more of just a reporting. So the board can be more informed as to the types and amounts of waivers that are being issued. So pages 10 through 15 is what we're asking for immediate approval of, and the others we're asking for approval but with a delayed implementation. And understanding during that time when we're analyzing it, we may be coming back to you with additional changes to those.
Well, I'm gonna begin by asking who amongst the campuses, where's the input from the campuses in the work that's being done here, and what group is it? Is it part of academic affairs? Is it part of budget finance? Who is working on this?
There is the Chancellor's Task Force or committee that was working on it, made up of a number of campuses. We've also run this and the numbers calculations through all of the financial VP staffs at all of the campuses, so not just the task force. And we have brought it through budget finance as well.
Okay, Mr. Ness?
Madam Chair, Tammy, on the waiver forms, could you go over any major changes that are taking place there? just highlight some of those.
On the form itself?
The data form, page 15 in the blue numbers.
Correct.
Okay, that whole form is new.
Okay. Any major changes in philosophy or policy that we should know about?
I didn't consider anything really a major change in philosophy. It's more just the ability for us to track what's being done and report it consistently and regularly. And then we'll be able to track it. Right now, we've kind of got, we don't have an apples to apples across some of the institutions. So this would give us that ability to report and understand in a consistent apples to apples methodology.
Chancellor?
Madam Chair, just a comment. Also, if you notice on the form, there's plenty of latitude for the campuses to provide specific additional eligibility requirements, selection criteria. So if a campus finds something works uniquely with their programs, because obviously some campuses have medical schools, law schools, location, that we're mindful that they need to respond to market forces. That's kind of our underlying philosophy is we put a lot of responsibility on the presidents to run, their enterprise. The market is very different from Williston to Wahpeton, from Fargo to Dickinson. And so we're trying to get standardized reporting of data, but then allow for that latitude. If there are things that are unique to how they run that, we can now see this with more visibility for you and other people.
Point. Okay, I just want to make sure that we are discussing the institutional waiver data form, blue page numbers 15 within the supporting documents. Is there more discussion, continued discussion? Mr. Hacker?
Madam Chair, I have a couple of questions. If Nick Vaughn might be able to answer the first one. Is there a current cap in statute on a 2.5% tuition increase? That's still,
Madam
that's
Chair,
still in statute?
members of the board, I believe so, yes. Yep.
Do you know if that statute had a sunset to it?
I would have to go back and look. I'm not sure. I don't know, Tammy, if you're aware off the top of my head.
Madam Chair, I think that is in session law, which would mean it would expire at the end of this current biennium unless the legislature institutes it again.
If I can continue, Madam Chair.
Yes, a further question. If you could wait a second, Mr. Hacker,
sure.
or do you? Okay. The question, please.
Oh, I had a question very similar to Nick's. Are we better off moving forward with changes that we want to institute in this area so that when we go into the legislative session, we have something to present to them? Or are we, as Tammy said, waiting for them to make their decisions? And if we are running our system in our colleges and universities, it would seem to me that we would want to go to them with the changes that we have made in the waiver system, and then we can explain to them how it has affected our system, with the opportunity of all of us realizing that there is a chance that we may not get what we all wanted, but at least we have a roadmap.
Dr. Melliker, thank you. The Chancellor would like to respond to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Member Melliker, great question, and I think that's essentially what we're doing here. The work was done by John Richmond, all the campuses, then the CFOs have come together, that it's kind of a two-step process. The data is all being standardized so we understand what's happening with waivers, which the legislature asked us to do. If you remember, that was added to our task back in, I think, the meeting in Fargo in March. The second step is the tuition policy being updated to be more responsive to changing conditions. And so what you're doing is you're giving a planning aid to the campus by saying these principles we support, however we need some more time to study, adjust, take feedback from changing conditions. Because from the time that John Richmond briefed this in June, we had a special session, another allotment, and so it's kind of a two-step process that I think gets to the spirit of what you're talking about.
Ms. Dolan, you have a response?
Yep. I just wanted to add one thing that I failed to mention when I first described it. This would implement these changes. It would also, but not till fall of 2019, but it would also allow the campuses the flexibility to implement parts of them earlier if that's better for their campus, because I think some of the institutions are farther along in making some of these changes than others. and are more able to handle them. So this would give them that flexibility. But they would need to come back with the board approval during the rate setting process that happens each spring. So they would come in with their plan, and the board would get to see that.
Thank you. Mr. Hacker?
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. And I don't want, and I'm going to ask just two more questions. And I think really great work was done with this study group. There are 5 principles in the study that we're approving here. And so I want to qualify my questions to one of the principles and not all of them, because I think really, really great work was done. And I think we've done, I'm very supportive of 4 of the principles. I have some questions on principle number 5.
Can you direct us to, are you referring to the documents here, Mr. Hacker? What
Page 8 of the hyperlink
of the
document.
hyperlink? Okay, we are moving to page 8 of the hyperlink within the supporting document. So this would be page 8 blue numbers. Is that correct? Okay. So all the locations are on the same slide. Principle 5.
When Budget and Finance took this up, the question was really on Principle 5, and we asked for some time so that Tammy could collect some, some impact of sources of funding, et cetera. And so already we've heard, currently there's a statute with a 2.5% tuition cap on it that it should sunset, I believe, although I'm not reading the statute, so I don't know if it's permanent or if it has a sunset on it. So in the report that was just given, there are some institutions that are going to need a 3% increase to accommodate the changes in these rates, specific to Principle 5. So I got a couple of questions. Tammy, if we adopt the report, even though it's 2019 for implementation, would institutions be able to begin to market the new tuition rates, even though we're sitting here saying we might kick this down the road to better understand what impact this might have? Would institutions be able to go recruit sophomores, freshmen for their 19 class based on using a new calculation from Principle 5?
Madam Chair, Member Hacker, I believe that they could, because this would be approved by the board. Maybe Dr. Richmond, if he has any clarification on that, since he's actually at an institution, would be doing that. But my understanding is that they could, because these would be approved.
It would be board approved. Mr. Richmond, do you have any input on that? Dr. Richmond?
Chair Nesset, I would have a similar perspective as Tammy. The slight variation to that might be an institution right now is required to charge the current rate. The task force's recommendations are before you. What's before you to approve today is for implementation of 2019. If a college wants to come before the board and ask for approval to change from current to the recommended before 19, you would have another opportunity to make that decision. You could agree to allow an institution to move forward before 2019. You could agree that you could not approve the request, and they would then not implement any changes to the current tuition rates that you see in Principle 5 until 2019. And with the caveat, as Tammy said earlier, during this time frame, we will also continue to look at the data to verify the impact with each passing biennium, with each passing legislative session. This is a never-ending discussion. Things will modify and have to be adapted each session.
Thank you. Mr. Hacker?
Sure. Thanks, Madam Chair. And I understand there's a lot of processes that occur over a period of time, but we're pretty much walking out this door today and saying bullet point number 3, that out-of-state tuition shall no longer be calculated at 1.25, but shall be calculated at 1.2. That's what we're setting here as a board if we adopt Principle 5 as is.
Right.
Tammy, I'd like to ask one more question. In general, is there a shift of tuition revenue or cost to students from out-of-state students to in-state students with these changes.
Madam Chair, if these rates are implemented without our further analysis, if we're directing these institutions to make it revenue neutral, yes, then there would need to be a shift somewhere to make up that extra revenue. If that's not a direction that we're going, then in some cases, it would be a loss of revenue to the institutions, and that's, I mean, it varies right now. Some of the calculations are to 10 million, 2 million, a few hundred thousand. It varies by institution, and that's part of why I want more time to study that before we finalize it.
However, this principle is within the part of the document that is before us for a vote today.
Yes, it is.
And it includes the out-of-state tuition rate change that Mr. Hacker is questioning.
Yes, it does.
Chancellor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. A key thing would be to point out here is the word no lower than. So if it doesn't make sense for a campus or an enterprise to do that, they go higher. So again, the idea behind this is to give more latitude to campuses. Some are close to the Canadian border, some are right next to the Minnesota border. As we talked before, this is like a complex algorithm. We can't offer some classes just because of scale. If we don't have students coming out of state taking, let's say, molecular biology class in adequate numbers, we can't offer it. Addendums in here that we haven't gone into, but several campuses have done research to show out-of-state students stay at a rate of up to 40%. They integrate into our economy. So if you add all those factors in, second, third order effects, probably the net to the state of North Dakota is positive. And so that's why we need more time to study it and not to implement for another year. But these are why the study group has taken as much time as it has. So.
Mr. Hacker.
Madam Chair, I don't have any other questions. I'm just going to give my feedback at this point in time, and that is I support the other four principles, and I think more study needs to be done, as the Chancellor just mentioned, as Ms. Dolan just mentioned a few minutes ago on number 5, and I think we can keep studying that in the interim. So I would support, and I'm not going to make a motion at this time because I think there may be other discussion out there, but I would support the other 4 with leaving 5 off and amending the report.
As far as logistic, Ms. Dolan, is that something that we can separate this out and deal with principle number 5 separately?
Yes, you could separate that out.
Okay, I'd ask the other locations or other board members for further discussion on this.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I have some similar concerns maybe that Nick has, but possibly on the opposite side of the ledger, in line with what the Chancellor talked about. Workforce in North Dakota is a huge issue, and we just completed a study in Devil's Lake about our nursing shortage. And even if we were able to fill up our schools and our colleges and universities with our in-state nursing students, we still wouldn't have enough to fulfill our needs. And I think this is not only true in that industry, but true through other industries. So I'm in favor of actually reducing the out-of-state tuition to bring it closer to what in-state tuition is, to attract these students. For example, in Fargo, South Dakota students that we possibly are not getting. But out west, just read that Williston now, their foundation is offering a program to reach out to Montana students to attract students to their college. And that's a little bit different issue because their foundation is tuition. But on the other hand, they realize that they do need to have students at their college. That is one way that they're reaching out to do that. Dr. Richmond's program in Washington would be another one. We need to make sure we can reach down to South Dakota students to bring them to Washington to go to our college there. So I'm a firm believer of if we can bring those tuitions closer together, and it's fair students that do not have a cheap program, a reciprocity program, the more students we attract to the system.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I would add to that, I think Kevin is right on. We live in a rural part of the world. And you can generate revenue all kinds of ways. You can generate revenue by raising the price. You can generate revenue by lowering the price and going for the volume play. And I really think the lower we get our out-of-state tuition becomes a great market tool for attracting those out-of-state people that are so critical to us. It's just a reality. We're in a rural part of the world. If we can recruit from the more populous areas, that's a huge gain for us. And I think it could end up being revenue neutral with the anticipated volume increase.
So, I would be in favor of keeping Principle 5.
If I could interrupt for a moment.
Excuse me, just a second. Locations, we have an IT issue here.
We were having a few problems with the Fargo microphone earlier. We thought we had it fixed, but obviously it's not. Dan, the IT person we were communicating with, said he had a standby mic. So hopefully we can get an email to him and switch that out fairly soon.
All right, Fargo, okay. We're looking to change your microphone so we get we heard your comments, Mr. Morton, Dr. Melliker, but they were somewhat broken. Either that or can the mic be closer to the speaker?
That may help.
It was close to the speaker.
That may help. I think the bottom line is I think their operating system just wasn't jiving with us. But maybe a new microphone that's on standby can get there soon.
Okay. In the meantime, we'll just ask you perhaps to just speak a little slower on the Fargo side. I apologize for that, but we'll see if we have any questions that we don't feel we're getting your entire message, we will let you know. Continued discussion. Did we have a question from Minot? Okay. Doctor, we have a question here at Bismarck.
Madam Chair, Mr. Hacker, thank you very much for bringing this up. I think this is a really important issue, especially as we are going into a new legislative session. I think it's important to understand the financial consequences also for North Dakota students, but I think it's also important to understand the implications for the classroom. Getting out-of-state students my experience for that in Minot has been very great. To have a lot of out-of-state students in the Grow North Dakota program, and I think it's all over the state where that is the case. So I think it is actually really good to study this in detail and to see all the consequences what this bringing of out-of-state students and out-of-country students does to North Dakota as well as to the educational system.
Thank you, Dr. Chancellor.
I just want to echo that, Member Hacker. I appreciate you're definitely onto a key issue here. But for people who don't have the document, because I know we're live streaming, we have the media people here, that change that Member Hacker looked at shifted it from 1.25 to 1.2, again, as a no lower then. So it wasn't like the out-of-state students would pay less than in-state. It just would shift it. And again, this was a discussion over several months, the thought that it gave more flexibility in the various marketplaces from Dickinson, Williston, Minot, which are very close to Canada and Montana, and Wahpeton and NDU and UND next to South Dakota and Minnesota, that we're just giving them a little more flexibility. But again, these are all things that we could revisit and bump it back up to 1.25 or wherever. But again, the key thing for people not seeing the document is out-of-state students would still pay more than North Dakota students.
Mr. Ness.
Madam Chair, I agree with Nick that we should study this, take a look at it, and see what the impact really is. I would not want our students to subsidize international students from Manitoba and Saskatchewan, so I would like to see the impact of this before we vote on it.
Thank you. And I think really the question here, if I can ask you, Mr. Hacker, is who shoulders any potential burden here? Does it come on to our in-state North Dakota students if there's an impact?
Madam Chair, that's exactly the point. It's not that we don't value international students or out-of-state students. We have reciprocity agreements, we have WICHE agreements to recruit students in. Some of those agreements include like vet medicine so that we can send those students out. my sense is one size doesn't fit all, and that's why I have a philosophical issue here that we're gonna adopt something that we don't know the full implications of, and we're gonna just say we're gonna come back to it later. When why don't we just study it and get it right, or at least close to right the first time? So I would support the 4 without the 5th, but let's not take it off the radar. We just need to do a little bit more work.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
this is John Richmond in Fargo.
Dr. Richmond?
With what's before the board for their consideration today, that additional study can be done. And I think the task force, and I'll only speak for my college, we would like the board to allow the maximum flexibility. And I agree with Nick's comment, one size doesn't fit all. But what's before you today is to be an implementation date of these rates. So we're talking about the out-of-state, it's currently at 1.25, and it will remain at 1.25 until, if you approve this, until fall 2019. With the caveat that if one or more institutions wants to reduce it for 2019, myself or any of the other presidents would have to come back to this board and ask that request to be implemented before that 2019 date. At which time, I know in our case, we would bring that data that would show you the impact. And we would bring the data that would be very clear for you to make a clear decision, at least at one of the colleges as it comes forward. I don't think any of the colleges or universities are willing to gamble the financial position that we are currently in. And I don't think any of the colleges are willing to put this on the back of our North Dakota students. But I do know, particularly in our case, and Chancellor Hager said it, those of us that are on borders, we're asking for the flexibility with further data coming to you by each college to allow us to recruit a better workforce, a larger workforce to the state of North Dakota. So I think you can get your data when that request comes from the individual institutions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Further discussion?
Madam Chair, if I may ask, this is Nick Evans, a point of clarification too on previous comments. The Chancellor pointed out that the language is no lower than. So if an institution were to need that continued 1.25 rate to remain revenue neutral, they would be able to do so with an exception. Am I correct in understanding that?
Chancellor?
Yeah, that's correct, that if the model works differently in different areas, they have a little more flexibility. But again, I totally acknowledge Member Hacker's question, because the ratio does go down. So campuses could lower it, but again, each campus would have to come back if they want to do this before 2019 and bring the data to you.
Further discussion? Okay, hearing none. At this point, we need to move forward. This needs to go to board action, so we do need a vote, and I believe there's two parts to this. May I go back to this? Mr. Vaughn, can you help us with, I understand we have, maybe you can explain that to the group parts.
Madam Chair, members of the board, as I understand, and Tammy, correct me if I'm wrong, as it's listed on the agenda, there's two separate items. You'd vote on the tuition model separately, and you'd vote on the waiver definitions and reporting. The tuition model is the one that you're asking for the delayed implementation to 2019. The only, to Member Hacker's point, if there's going to be some condition placed on the tuition waiver, or I'm sorry, the tuition model, it should be clarified as part of the motion. So you can just move to accept with delayed implementation until fall 2019, or you can put a condition onto it, depending on how you want to do it.
Madam Chair, so the delayed implementation is only to principle number 5?
My understanding was that it was all going to be delayed until fall 2019.
Well, Madam Chair, I'll just divide the question right now, because I'm going to make a motion to adopt principles 1 through 4 and we'll cut this up a little bit. And so I'd move principles 1 through 4.
May I just
With a
clarify?
delayed implementation of
Thank you.
2019.
Which are still on the delayed implementation.
Yes.
And just one point of clarification, if you are moving to divide the question, then we need a motion to divide the question, have that seconded, voted on, and then go with the second motion, which would be 1 through 4.
So our option is to adopt the entire policy as proposed or to not. So
No.
then that would tell me that we would have to actually adopt an amendment to the proposed policy to delay the implementation to 2019 separately.
Well, and just so if I wasn't clear, I apologize. The recommendation, as I understood from the system, was a motion to approve the tuition model with delayed implementation until fall 2019. If you wanted a different motion to that, to make it conditional, to say, I'm making a motion to approve principles 1 through 4.
That's correct, because there's not a motion on the floor right now, so I
Right.
will move principles 1 through 4 with the delayed implementation of 2019.
Okay.
Do we need a motion to allow the separation of these items?
Well, now that there's a motion, we can see if there's any seconds for that.
Okay, just so the other locations understand the discussion here, the motion on the floor, Mr. Hacker, could you state your motion that is on the floor at this time?
Sure, Madam Chair, I would move principles 1 through 4 with the delayed implementation of 2019.
All right, is there a second for that motion?
Second.
Christie? I'm sorry, is there further discussion on the motion that's on the floor? Hearing none, Christie?
Mr. Steeman?
Yeah.
Dr. Melliker?
No.
Mr. Morton?
No.
Mr. Hacker?
Yes?
Mr. Evans?
No.
Mr. Ness?
Yes?
Board Chair Nesset?
Yes. The motion,
Passes, there's a majority of the votes cast.
okay, there is a majority of the votes, so the motion passes. So principles 1 through 4 have been approved by the board. Now, there is still principle 5. Is there, excuse me, am I right, Mr. Vaughn?
If there's a motion to consider it, then yes, that could be taken up by the board.
This is Kevin.
Madam Chair.
I would make that motion to consider number 5 with the implementation occurring in 2019.
Thank you, Dr. Melliker. So everybody understands there's now a motion on the floor to approve the tuition model, principle number 5. We're voting just on that. Now, I would ask for a second to that motion.
Member Evans, second.
Thank you. Further discussion?
This is Greg. Here's my thoughts on Principle 5, and moving forward, I understand the impact. The financial impact has to be examined to see if it would ever be approved down the road. What's been made clear is that if anybody wanted to do anything prior to that, they would have to bring documentation and show that financially this is going to be very revenue neutral. And we wouldn't approve it, we wouldn't even allow it in 2019 if it's not revenue neutral. And so I guess I'm wondering what our holdup is. If someone's going to bring in data that shows that it's at the very least revenue neutral, my guess is we would probably approve it. And so my thought is, what are we waiting for on it? If we're going to require data that shows it's revenue neutral, and if we as a board don't believe the data, we can vote it down. And we can do that whether it's tomorrow or whether it's 2018 or whether it's 2028. So I guess I'm wondering if someone is ready and prepared and done the background, done the informational study, and brings information to us that supports doing this and approval, why are we going to tell them to wait?
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ness.
Madam Chair, I'm not opposed to number 5. I think we should study it more. I think we need to know the implications, and I don't want to go into legislative session stating that we are going to lower our tuition for out-of-state or international students. And that would be my point, that we delay this to see where everything falls, and then we vote on that.
Thank you. Further discussion?
Madam Chair, I know there's been a lot of discussion that says we can bring this up later, but I recall the amount of time we spent as a board on the tuition rates for this last year was less than 5 minutes.
We're spending more time here today. Good. The board is doing their due diligence. Thank you, Mr. Hacker. Further discussion? There is a motion and a second on the floor dealing with tuition model principle number 5. Any further discussion?
This is Greg Steeman.
Mr. Steeman?
You know, to be honest with you, as a board, I don't want to spend more than 5 minutes figuring out what we should charge for tuition. That's what we charge our institutional presidents with, or the study groups, or our finance people in the university system office to evaluate these models and say, are these revenue neutral? Are we making sure we're not putting anything on the backs of the North Dakota students, and we're still meeting expectations? So I guess that's what I'm trying to do is, as a board, we have to trust the information that's brought to us, and if we don't trust it, we vote it down. That's okay. But I'm not an actuary, and I don't claim to be one, and I didn't sleep at a Holiday Inn Express last night.
Madam Chairman, I would add to the discussion too. As a state, as a state board of higher education, I would think anything we can do to increase the workforce, to bring quality people into our state, is a plus for not only the students of North Dakota, but the people of North Dakota, as we bring people in that can fill the jobs and the economy can boom like it should. And right now it's not, because of a lack of workforce participation. And so we have an opportunity here. I hate to say it's become provincial. We compete in a global economy. We can't the fence around North Dakota. I would just like to see us think of the bigger picture. By bringing these out-of-state students in, it's a huge win for our economy and companies in North Dakota, where they can invest and continue to grow. So eventually those students, everyone wins.
Madam Chair, I agree with Dr. and on this issue, because I think that the campuses, it will have an opportunity to see if this is an effective policy for them and effect it has on finances. But give up an opportunity where we possibly could attract prospective students to our colleges and universities that are very, very competent. I think we'd be remiss in not doing that by tuition to what our students pay. I'm trusting the workforce, or the tuition committee that was put together by Dr. and the input they have provided us. We have lots to fill throughout our system, and hopefully this is the way that we can do that.
Thank you very much, both Mr. Morton and Dr. Melliker. Chancellor, you have a comment? I would allow that during this discussion with the motion on the floor.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm totally mindful of Member Ness and Hacker sensitivity to the legislature and the perception about are we taking care of the North Dakota kids first. And I just want to assure you that that two of the things that you have tasked us to do, the one additional study that Dr. Bashani is leading, is how to better transition North Dakota high school kids into the university system. This was a major discussion item in 2 meetings I just had recently. And so we are working diligently on getting the best practices, how to do that, how to raise the the standards earlier on. The Envision process is exactly along those lines, from the kids just entering elementary school all the way up, how to better get them in. You've also adopted a goal to raise attainment to 65, maybe to 70. But, as was just pointed out by members Morton, Steeman, Melliker, and others, right now we do have a severe shortage in many areas. So I would look at this strategically, that these rates are for 2019, maybe 2020, 2021, 22, 23, and then as our kids at a higher propensity start coming into the university, we might be able to then bring these down. So it's kind of a complex calculus of a bunch of factors, and I'm totally sensitive that the headline might be from the media that, oh, North Dakota kids have to do more, but the reality is it's several efforts all moving together, and we're totally dedicated to the kids of North Dakota, getting them into our colleges at a higher rate, but it's going to take a while to do that.
Thank you. Dr. Pierre?
Thank you, Dr. Nesset. Just one question or one remark. For me, there is no doubt that attracting out-of-state students or students from anywhere to the classroom is very positive. The question is, how are we going to make the case? So, and the question is, do we want to make the case right now by adopting policy number 5 or outline number 5, or would we like to say, okay, let's postpone this and make the case later and bring it forward once we actually have a big report, okay, this is going to be the impact. I think that's the question that the board is at this moment.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Further discussion? Hearing none, we have a motion on the floor, seconded and discussion. We're now prepared to vote on it, and this is to vote on the tuition model, principle number 5, for approval. The motion is to approve principle number 5. Christy?
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Mr. Hacker?
No.
Mr. Morton?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
No.
Dr. Melliker?
Yes.
Board Chair Nesset?
No. Motion carried. Now we have before us the second part of this tuition model, the waiver, definitions, and reporting. I'll once again go to Mr. Vaughn, and if you could clarify the item before us.
Madam Chair, members of the board, and again, I'm going to look to Tammy to make sure I'm saying this right. This is the waiver, definitions, and reporting for the purposes of data and definition consistency. And this would be, I believe, immediate once they adopt it. Okay.
Is there a motion to approve the waiver, definitions, and reporting?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second,
Who is the second?
Morton?
Thank you, Don. Further discussion? Hearing none. Christy, a roll call?
Mr. Hacker?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Mr. Morton?
Yes.
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Dr. Melliker?
Yes.
Board Chair Nesset?
Yes. All right, thank you. Agenda item number 10, our strategic plan. We'll ask for Linda Donlin to present for us. And Chancellor, you have a comment first?
Yeah, I just want to thank Linda for all she's been working on this, and we'll have one more meeting, but as people know, she has announced her transition, but I just want to thank her here because I'm not sure she'll have a talking part in November. And also, what you don't know behind the scenes, but many of you have been involved, her staff has been working the Envision process. So your strategy is a living document, to quote our chairman. There'll be some adjustments she'll brief here in a second, but also we're having some incredibly useful discussions around the state on the Envision task force that you established in May, and she's been a critical part of all that. So I just want to publicly thank her in case in November we don't get a chance to do that.
Thank you very much. I will second that. I think that's you've done great work, Linda. Thank you. Strategic plan.
Yes, on the strategic plan, as you recall, you had that on your agenda at your June retreat. And according to Century Code and board policy, the board must have a strategic plan and you must review it annually. So in June, you reviewed it and you prioritized some of the goals. And it was on the agenda last time, and it basically did not go through an approvals of the tweaks and updates because of the tuition model discussion. So you tabled it, but you did pull out the attainment goal and approve that. So now what we have before you is the updates to the plan, and your document that you received has language that Tammy gave me ahead of time, assuming that the discussion on the tuition model changes would be approved. So I believe what we have still works, but because the only change really is, it says a tuition study recommendations fully implemented by fall 2019. That's the change in that particular strategy. And then the other change is in strategy 1.2, where we talk about mandatory fees. And then it's also consistent, easy to understand fee definition and reporting fully implemented fall 2019. So I believe that language still works with your latest discussions.
Linda, can I just make sure that all the locations, including Bismarck, are on the same page? What page? Are you in the hyperlink document of the strategic plan?
Yes, so if you go to the board summary document at the very top, you hyperlink to the strategic plan.
What page in that are you on? Other 9. What item number then are you on? You're on 1 point? Okay. I'm on it too. Goal number 1, deliver degrees that are the best values in the nation.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, goal
I
number
just want
1.
to make sure everybody at all the locations are on the same information,
Yes.
so we're moving together. Thank you.
So if you go to the board summary on the strategic plan, so you'd have to page down to that one. Christy, which page would that be?
18.
18 in your packet. And at the very top of that, the tweak plan is linked to that. So this contains all of the tweaks that were discussed in June, were discussed with Cabinet over the course of the summer, and then now includes the tuition model discussion. So our recommendation is the board would approve the 2016 updates to the strategic plan.
Question?
Yes, discussion. Mr.
Madam
Ness?
Chair, Madam Chair, Linda, where are we at with the Lumina study since we made the motion last time? Could you give us a report on that?
Yes, I am working with Susan Heegard and with the Lumina Foundation on developing the grant for $100,000. And I am going to Lumina for a meeting in Indianapolis on November 18th with guidance on putting together the goals and then and the grant application. So once we get to that, we'll develop the strategy and move forward with that.
Thank you. Further discussion? Doctor?
Thank you, Linda Donlan. Thank you for all the reports. I have one question in general. In the summary of proposed action, you say last time, I think, there said financial implications could be considerable if goals are not achieved, and academic implications also should be considerable if goals are not achieved. Can you explain that, please?
Well, if you look at the overall strategic plan, and you know the goals are to provide programs people want where and when they need them. It has to do with attainment and access, and it has to do with working as a system. And in order to do all of those things, if we don't achieve those goals together as one plan, there could be pretty intense financial and academic implications.
Can you explain how large these implications would be?
Well, I don't have that off the top of my head, but Chancellor, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a general statement that we realize we have to be more efficient. That's the Shared Services Task Force, which is doing a lot of good work. We realize we have to be able to offer courses. The workforce is in a massive period of change. I was just at the Governor's Workforce Development Council, and John Richmond gave a very impassioned speech. These are real implications for our kids. mismatched skills with industry. I was just with WEAC yesterday up in Minot. Hess Corporation is going to give a substantial sum to study workforce because the implications are so big. So it's a general statement that these are non-trivial outcomes both on efficiency as an enterprise, aligning our students, our curriculum, and we don't have the money to have a bunch of people doing things that are redundant. And so it's a general statement to get the gravity to this. And secondly, we are now getting more metrics in here. As you remember, the presidents all have now provided goals for retention. We'll be moving to eventually some other goals on attainment. So it's a general statement that this is not just another plan out there floating, but has real consequences. But if we can find money to study all these consequences, we would study them more for you, but there's a limit to what we can study.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Further discussion? I would like to ask Ms. Donlin, there was a program before, and I would like just a statement from you on pathways to student success. It was the process that the board approved. This was board approved policy for a prior program. I believe Mr. Morton will remember this from his time earlier on the board. Could you address how that is incorporated into this?
Sure. When we developed the current plan, which we call the NDUS Edge, there were 3 items where the pathways plan was incorporated into it, and the board asked that we have those items labeled pathways initiatives. And as we've gone forward in the last couple of years with the implementation of the strategic plan, those items have either been already implemented, which, for example, on the increased admission standards, that was one of them. Attainment goal, which you addressed last time and was actually enhanced. And then the third one is the tuition model. So all of those things have been addressed and assimilated in one form or another into today's plan. So I looked at it as we probably do not need to call that out anymore as the plan exists today. It's somewhat of a brand issue too, because Pathways is used in different ways at some institutions for things. So I considered this just kind of a cleanup item as to put it all together under one, because Pathways is now fully assimilated into the board's plan.
Thank you. Further discussion? Hearing none, this is an item for board approval. Do we have a motion to approve the strategic plan as presented by Ms. Donlin?
Meliker, so move.
Thank you. A second?
Second. Morton.
Thank you, Mr. Morton. Further discussion? And a vote, Christy?
Mr. Hacker?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Mr. Morton?
Yes.
Dr. Meliker?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Board Chair Nesset?
Yes. Agenda item number 11, change to the State Board of Higher Education November 16th, 2016 meeting venue from Minot State to Bismarck State College. Chancellor?
This is fairly straightforward. We already spoke with Dr. Shirley, and we were mindful that would keep us out of Minot a little longer, but we plan to get back up there. But for logistics meetings for members to be at this meeting, this will be the first meeting after an election. We're going into a legislative session. It was really important to be as accommodating to as many members as possible. So by moving this to this location, we'll be sure to have, barring some unforeseen circumstance, all the board members will be able to attend in Bismarck, whereas Minot was not logistically possible. So that's the purpose for that, and request your support on moving that venue.
That's good. Dr. Shirley, thank you for accommodating us, and we will be to Minot next. Any further questions or discussion? Hearing none, do we have a motion to approve the venue change?
So moved, Madam Chair. This is Nick Evans.
Nick Evans, thank you. Second?
Second.
Second from Mr. Ness, thank you. Roll call?
Mr. Morton?
Yes.
Mr. Hacker?
Yes.
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Dr. Meliker?
Yes.
Board Chair Nesset?
Yes. At this point, we will take a, let me see what time it is. We're going to take a short break. Does anybody have the time right now? It is, okay, it is 10:16. We will reconvene at 10:25. Thank you. Excuse me, we'll try this again. We're now ready to reconvene our meeting. We are on agenda item number 12, establish our governance committee. Chancellor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'll be turning this over to Member Ness in a minute, but just for those who may not have followed the discussion or weren't there in Grand Forks, we talked about several of the Chancellor's Cabinet studies, the progress we made, but the governance study, several of things we're working are going to be pending, but one new item that was added was to establish a governance committee made up of state board members to look at things like education, training, best practices. But because bringing more than a couple board members together to talk about that would constitute a meeting, we need to have this period of time here to be able to talk about your thoughts on that. At this point, I'd turn it over to Member Ness and also Tisa Mason, or Dr. Mason, who's online, is on that committee as well. She'll have comments as well. So, sir.
Thank you. We spent a fair amount of time last year discussing different governance issues. Dr. Mason was very helpful on this. And one of them was president reviews, evaluations, and we wanted to proceed with that. And we presented some of that information to the board, but really we need to follow up on it and continue getting this taken place before winter, spring, so we can have that process in place. I think we're ready to go, but we need one more board member. So what I'm asking for is there a board member who would volunteer to be on this committee?
Madam Chair, sorry. How often is the committee going to meet?
Thanks, Nick.
You're welcome, Don.
Yeah.
Don, was that a second? We heard that you would like to join as well.
Well, again, we have to keep it below 3, but we realize that to have a couple board members there, since we're talking about your board governance, we try to meet often over the phone. People are not traveling. So it's part of the Chancellor's Cabinet studies and would reflect on, as Member Ness said, presidential evals, the innovations of bringing board members in, staggering times. But then the other issue we were looking at is actually establishing a committee, much like the audit committee or something, that eventually is made up of 3 boards that makes decisions about training. So you'll be dealing with a range of issues, including establishing your own standing committee. But I would anticipate doing most of this by phone. But if we had another member from Bismarck, that would make meetings easier, since Dr. Scogan's on the committee and Dr. Mason was the only one who had to travel. But we would be responsive to your obviously control of the schedule for that committee.
I would say we met 3 or 4 times last year by phone and never over an hour.
Okay, yeah. I'll defer to Don if he sounded like he was interested. He's got some seniority over me. If he's not interested, I'm happy to do it.
I would be very supportive of Nick.
Can we just clarify who is on the committee currently?
Yeah, it started as the Chancellor's Cabinet study on governance, Dr. Scogan, Dr. Mason, myself, and then Mike Ness. And then one of the recommendations through Dr. Mason's research is among the best board practices, you have your own committee that looks at governance, so it's not the Chancellor or Dr. Mason telling you what kind of training you should do. So by adding another member here, we can still stay below the meetings requirement and get more input from the board that way on how they want to structure, especially that last part. So that's who's currently there. And if Member Hacker is directed by you to do that, then he can join us.
Excellent.
This is
Mr.
Greg.
Hacker, thank you.
Nick and Mike aren't on any of the same committees, are they?
Madam Chair, no, we are not.
No, Mr. Steeman,
Okay,
they are
and the only reason I say that is just so we protect ourselves from the committee rules too.
Thank you. Good point.
So congratulations, Nick.
Or condolences. Thank you.
Congratulations. Truly, thank you for stepping up and taking this. I mean, this is very important. This is we appreciate your commitment. Mr. Ness, likewise, same thing for you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
This is Kevin Milliker. Congratulations, Nick. And I feel very strongly about the opportunities to stagger presidential evaluations, because right now it is so much work on the Chancellor and the Chancellor's office to get those done at the same time. So the more opportunities we have to stagger them by whatever is appropriate, a month, 2 months, or whatever, I think it's for a much running system. So I would encourage Dick, as you start your yeah.
If I may, if I could thank Dr. Mason for her work last year. She did a lot of research for us and really put a lot of good ideas before us. So thank you, Dr. Mason.
Thank you.
I agree. And Dr. Mason, do you have any comments that you would like to contribute to this discussion on this governance committee forming?
I'm just looking forward to moving forward. I think board effectiveness and having the opportunity to step back from content and focus on some process and ongoing development for everyone would be a great contribution to the system.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Is there any further discussion on, I believe this is an action item. Do we, Mr.
Madam Chair, members of the board, this is something, now that it's been discussed, I don't think it needs to be an action item, as it sounds like it's into the development of the governance committee ultimately. So I don't think action is needed by the board.
All right, thank you. So at this point, then it will be board direction that Mr. Hacker will be join the governance committee with Mr. Ness. Thank you. Okay, on to system reports. Agenda item 13, Nexus ND. Chancellor Haggerott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you recall, way back last fall, we discussed this in some detail, the initiative that is to diversify our technological base in 3 areas: unmanned systems, data analytics, and cybersecurity. I just want to bring you an update. Some fairly major developments are going on this, and just want to compliment, and I'll try to mention some of the names. I can't get all of them, but you have quite a team of people working in these 3 areas. First off, with regard to cybersecurity, Dr. Feldner, at the governor's request, attended the governor's conference back in Boston. A major theme was cybersecurity. If you just look at the news, massive implications from outages across the east and west coast last week to the election being affected by people hacking into what they thought were private email accounts. But for us, most germane is the Department of Defense, DHS, and NSF look to be putting additional requirements on granting any computer cybersecurity research grants that you have to have certain certifications from the U.S. government, and we need to get moving on those. And so to compliment Ken Nygaard, Paul Laurie, Nick C., Prakash Ragathan, they're already working on this, and we'll be sending Dr. Nygaard. NDSU will be paying for that. We appreciate that because we have a distributed effort here. NDSU is leading the cyber effort. He'll be going to a national meeting on this, and we've already met with Dakota State, which has been designated a regional cyber support center for the Midwest. And so we're moving out as fast as we can, and I compliment again these people for being visionary enough to be laying the groundwork for this. Related to cyber, Dr. Scogan hosted the Deputy Fleet Cyber Command here 2 weeks ago and reaffirmed everything we're doing, and currently Bismarck is being reviewed for a $1.2 million grant by NSF for cyber 2-year programs. And I met Friday with the tribal colleges to try to better integrate them into this effort. So major implications there. The data analytics was second of the 3 legs, and that was of legislative interest, board interest. The world is changing with data analytics, and we have now established that again under NDSU, and appreciate NDSU providing that time for Dr. Osowski, and then from UND, Aaron Bergstrom and others. We will be actually having a trip with Don Morton, who's our board advisor for the Nexus effort, to go to Minnesota to look at their high-performance computing. But interestingly, both in the Fleet Cyber Command meeting and the UAS Summit, data analytics is the crucial thing to both cybersecurity and UAS. And so the first objective for the analytics group we now have defined down to be supporting of the UAS effort, and Commerce Department has put language in the governor's budget for up to several $1 million to support a data analytics effort in the UAS field. And which brings me to the last pillar of this, the UAS. Dr. Kennedy, or President Kennedy, will be convening that group. UND is leading this, which is arguably one of the state's highest priorities. Once he convenes that, we will then hold a governing group of the whole Nexus effort in December to review, action items, where we are. And in the UAS area, Probably the biggest joint grant ever given to UND and NDSU is pending, which is great progress that the two universities are working together. I just want to thank Aaron Reinholz, Shriek Lebajwa, Hesham El-Rawini, Grant Majimsi, Kelly Rush, and the director of all this is our own Jerry Rosted. So well-aligned, rapid-moving technology issues, and we have a lot of work to do, and they keep moving the goalposts, which you can imagine they do because of what's happening globally, but I just wanted to bring you up to date on those three efforts. So if there are any questions.
Thank you, Chancellor. Are there any questions for the Chancellor or any discussion on our Nexus ND? Hearing none, we will move ahead on the agenda. Item number 14, 15, 16, 17 fall under State Board of Higher Education Budget, Finance, and Facilities Committee report. Mr. Steeman.
Thank you, Chair Nesset. What I will do is, at the approval of legal, would like to discuss items 14 and 15. I believe Jane Grindy is available to provide some insight.
She is.
And then discuss 16 and 17 together, if that's okay with legal.
That's fine.
Okay, that is met with approval, and we do have Ms. Grindy here.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. Items 14 and 15 pertain to the NDUS retirement plans. I would like to note that both of these proposed actions have got vetted through the appropriate councils, with the last stop being with this committee. And under 302.3, this committee reviews and recommends changes to the retirement plan to the board. I think that's important to note. The first one, number 14, was an item that was raised by the NDUS Retirement Plan Oversight Committee. It has to do with terminated employees and their ability to roll over funds. Right now, the plan summary document that the board has put forth puts a maximum amount of distribution at $10,000. If you have over $10,000 in your retirement account, this is the defined contribution plan, I should note, those monies stay with the state until retirement. The recommendation is to raise that cap from $10,000 to $20,000 because there are numerous number of plans with low balances that are costly to administer. So if that was raised to a higher amount, it would defer costs.
Thank you. Any questions, Dr. Pining?
Yes, just a very simple question. So what happens with that money? So if you have less than $20,000 on the account, will it then just go to the individual, or what will happen exactly?
Currently, if an employee terminates and they have $10,000 or less, they have a choice to roll over those funds or withdraw them with the penalties, or they can choose to leave the funds in the account and continue to manage them through TIAA until age 59 and a half.
Thank you. Further questions or discussion? Item 14. Hearing none, we'll move on to item 15.
Thank you.
Grindy?
The next item was brought to us, the NDUS Retirement Planning Oversight Committee, by TIAA, alerting us that in the spring of 2017, the voluntary expense waiver for one of the investment options for the executive compensation plan, that's called a 401A, the voluntary expense waiver was going to end. So that would mean that participants in that investment would incur additional fees. Now, currently, there are no participants invested in the CREF money market account. So if this were changed to the recommended default investment, which is called the life cycle fund, we would be protecting those future enrollees or participants from incurring unnecessary fees. So the recommendation is to change the default investment from CREF money market to life cycle fund.
Thank you. And Mr. Steeman, this has all been reviewed by your Budget Finance Committee, correct?
Yes, Chair Nesset, and all four items were passed forward with at the recommendation of the committee.
Okay, and at this point, you would like us to to work on items 14 and 15 together. Is that correct?
Yeah, if we can approve those together, that would be great.
Okay, any further questions, comments, discussion?
Madam Chair, this is Andy on the phone. And I'm sorry I didn't get my question on item number 14. I apologize, I missed budget and finance last week, but are there any potential losses to employees if they are terminated? So in other words, the question, can they lose this retirement benefit once they're terminated either for either firing or loss of service if employees are terminated due to budget restraints?
Mr. Wakeford, your question is if there are any penalties if a person is terminated due to budget constraints?
Yes, that would be the question. If an employee are terminated.
What the effect on their retirement plan? Ms. Grindy, what's the process in place now?
Well, I think I understand the question, and the answer is there's no risk. Whatever the employee and the state puts in that account is fully vested.
That answers my question. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wakeford. Further questions, discussion? Hearing none, do we have a motion to approve agenda items 14 and 15?
Can I just put a point of order?
Yes, Dr. Pining?
Do we actually need a motion because it comes from a committee and it's already been voted on there?
No, Madam Chairman, members of the board, yes, it takes board action to adopt these. The action coming from committees is just a recommendation to the board.
So this does go to vote before the full board?
Yes, all the items on the consent agenda.
Okay. So at that point, do we have a motion to approve items 14 and 15?
So move, Morton.
Thank you, Mr. Morton. Second?
Melliker,
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Melliker. Further discussion? Hearing none. Christie?
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Mr. Hacker?
Yes.
Dr. Melliker?
Yes.
Mr. Morton?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Board Chair Nesset?
Yes. Moving on. Mr. Steeman, item 16.
Yeah, for items 16 and 17, is Rick Tonder available?
Is Mr.
Not.
Tonder available at any of the remote locations?
I'm here at Grand Forks.
In Grand Forks, yes, Mr. Steeman. We do have Mr. Tonder at the Grand Forks location.
Great, we'll have him comment on items 16 and 17. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Item number 16 is a deferred maintenance project, a group of deferred maintenance projects at UND, for which we'll approve the workers' plus to transfer of funds from the SBHE deferred maintenance pool. The three items are replacement of mechanical systems at
Mr. Tonder, excuse me just a second. May I just check with the IT if we can get a clearer
Is the mic
audio?
Maybe it'd be.
We're just having a little trouble hearing your words here. Is the
Can you hear this okay?
I can hear that just fine.
Try speaking
yes.
up just a little bit.
Thank you.
We've done this before.
We're getting better every time, Mr. Martin. Mr. Tonder, if you could continue.
Nicely done, Peter.
So you can hear me better now?
Yes, we can.
All right. Madam Chair, members of the board, item number 16 is a request for authorization for maintenance with UND. It is three projects bundled together, and it includes the replacement of mechanical equipment for its library, the replacement of the exterior wall, that's a critical glass structure for the airport administration building, and then finally the replacement of green leaders, which is piping that removes the roof water from the building and it stores the earth. at the Memorial Union altogether at that being requested, and also it's to transfer those funds from the board pool to the city for the use in this project. The criteria legislation for money is that it is within the master plan, the master plan and is, so it meets the criteria for transfer, and so approve that item. And then the last item is protection at Brandon Hall, a residence facility. And of course, that's always a good investment for the city to upgrade those fire protection system. It's expensive, of course, but areas at the university, the ceilings of parts of the building, in order to take and install the new fire alarm system. So again, that's a also idea to upgrade the fire alarm systems. I also recommend you approve that project.
I will point, thank you, Mr. Tonder, very much. I will point out for those having trouble listening here, do refer to your written documents. Mr. Tonder, it still is somewhat broken in your audio coming from Grand Forks. So please, board members, refer to your written documents, and I will ask for any questions or comments for either Mr. Tonder or for Mr. Steeman. Mr. Tonder, do you have any further information on item 16?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, no, I don't. If you're certainly open to questions, though.
Kevin Milliker, I do have a question on 17. Is that's funded from room and board funds, is it not?
Madam Chair, Dr. Milliker, that is correct. It's funded from revenues for the operation of the residence hall.
And do you, how is that funded? Is it a bond issue?
Typically, no, it's part of their maintenance funding. In other words, they establish a pool of money for maintenance work, and it comes from that source, from the local funds, as we refer to them.
It's paid out of cash then, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Are there further questions or discussion? Items 16 or 17. Mr. Tonder, do you have any further information on either item or both of these items?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, no, that concludes my information.
Thank you. Mr. Steeman?
No, just to reiterate, the committee moved these forward to recommend for approval.
Thank you. Once again, we do need a motion and would like to take these together. Is there a motion to approve agenda items 16 and 17 as presented from Budget Finance Committee?
Mrs. Steeman, so moved.
Thank you, Mr. Steeman. A second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Hacker. Further discussion? Christie?
Dr. Milliker,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
Yes.
Mr. Steeman,
Yes.
Mr. Ness,
Yes.
Mr. Hacker,
Yes.
Mr. Evans,
Yes.
Board Chair Nesset.
Yes. Thank you very much. Appreciate the work, Mr. Steeman and Mr. Tonder. Moving on.
Chair Nestor?
Yes.
I just want to also address Budget Finance Committee did discuss and heard from legal that they are in the process of drafting a faculty sick leave policy, and that it's in the early stages. They're going to run it through all the proper councils, receive as much input as possible from each campus and with system office, and then once it's in its preliminary form, it'll be brought before the board for a first reading.
Thank you. Does that conclude Budget Committee report?
Yes, Chair Nesset, it does. And just to go back, the driving motivator behind the faculty sick leave policy is the data inconsistencies. It's just one more issue that we're addressing and trying to get everything consistent across the board.
Excellent. That's important. Thank you. Okay, at this point, we'll move on to the Academic and Student Affairs Committee. Mr. Ness.
Okay, our committee met a couple weeks ago, and Dr. Don Morton was unable to be there, so I can give this report. We had items 18 through 21 to present to you, and I think if there are any questions, Dr. Rothfuss could probably get into the depth of those. Mainly new programs on 18, 19, and 20, and reorganization or organizational changes in 21. So if there are any questions specific to these, I'd refer them to Dr. Rothfuss.
Okay, thank you. Once again, I'll refer to the board documents. We are on the Academic and Student Affairs Committee, and there's additional information and hyperlinks with more information in our board materials. Are there any questions for Mr. Ness? Chancellor?
Dr. Rothfuss, I realized we had just on number 20, there was a word missing there. Do you have the word that would be there on number 20? I didn't mean to, in case board members didn't see. Yeah. So in case the board members are checking, was that joint by UND and NDSU, or did one have to take the lead on that one? It was item number 20, which is important. This is the joint program, so it's one of the first ones we're having joint programs going forward. So should that say NDSU and UND, or just one of the other? Do you recall?
That is joint NDSU and UND.
Okay. So under item 20, if you're reading that, it would be approved the joint submission for stage 1 and 2, or stage 2 for biomedical engineering. So that's a joint submission.
I think that was, Kevin Melker, I think that was listed in the summary that way, was it not? But not on the agenda?
I believe you're correct, Dr. Melliker. Further discussion?
Does NDSU currently have a biomedical engineering PhD?
No, but I believe if I remember the history on this, we're the ones somehow statutorily charged with being able to operate, and we're with UND, so both campuses can do it as a collaborative and broaden it out.
Thank you. I'll ask committee chair, is this a request to take all and move on all items together?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so this is items 18, 19, and 20 on our agenda. Do we have a motion to approve these as presented?
Our committee recommended we approve these, so I'd make that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Ness. Second?
Second.
Okay. This motion is dealing with 18 through 20, is that correct?
18, 19, 20.
18, 19, and 20, just for clarification here. We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Hearing none, Christy.
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Dr. Melliker?
Yes.
Mr. Hacker?
Yes.
Mr. Morton?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Board Chair Nesset?
Yes. Okay, thank you. Mr. Ness.
21 is a separate item. It's for organizational changes, and you can go through those, and if there are any questions, Dr. Rothfuss could help us with those.
Okay, once again, the materials in our packets along with additional information under the hyperlink. Are there any questions for Committee Chair Ness? Hearing none, this was moved for approval by committee.
Motion to approve 21.
And a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Hacker. Further discussion on agenda item 21. Hearing none. Christie?
Dr. Malaker?
Yes.
Mr. Morton?
Yes.
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Mr. Hacker?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Board Chair Nesset?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much for the committee work done here. Next items, Audit Committee. I am the chair of the Audit Committee, so I will report on this. This is item number 2 on media guidelines and reporting. This is for information for the board. I'd like to give some history as to what our current position is as far as the board, just to remind all the board members what our role has been in this. Back on August 12th, the Audit Committee met, and following discussion about the recent events that necessitated the meeting, the Audit Committee directed the Chancellor and the System Office to contract with a third party to determine the extent of President Brashani's involvement with media guidelines issued by the NDSU Athletic Department on July 29th. Specifically, the charge from the Audit Committee was to determine whether President Brashani's communications about the guidelines following their release violated board policy. Kathy Perkins, an attorney from Lawrence, Kansas, with experience conducting compliance-related investigations in higher education, was selected by the System Office. Following a search, she signed a contract August 31st and began her work on the review. As part of her investigation, Ms. Perkins visited Fargo for in-person interviews with several NDSU staff members, including President Brashani. Ms. Perkins submitted her report to the System Office on September 30th. The report was made available to the Audit Committee, the public, as well as the full board. To summarize, she found that President Brashani did not violate board policy, but noted, this is from her report, there could have been improvements in his decision-making and communication. End quote. Per board policy 302.2, the Audit Committee has the authority to retain third parties to assist in the conduct of an investigation. That is just what we did with regard to media guidelines matter, and I thank the Audit Committee for fulfilling its duties. I would note that this investigation was welcomed by President Brashani. Board policy does not, however, require that the Audit Committee discuss or make a recommendation about the investigation report before consideration by the entire board. I believe the content of Ms. Perkins' report speaks for itself, but I will entertain comments from board members at this time. Otherwise, the board, based on the timeline we set at our June 29th meeting, will revisit President Brashani's contract next month at the November 16th meeting. I welcome comments from the board members regarding the Kathy Perkins report that was presented to you.
Kevin Melker, I had a chance to review the report and look through it, and I thought it was very thorough and done very well. And so I wholeheartedly would recommend moving forward with the meeting, which sounds like it's going to be November in Bismarck, on dealing with Dr. Brashani's contract. We have all received many emails, telephone calls, and meetings with concerned citizens, legislators, students, faculty, and staff on this issue. And from the introduction of the initial presidential evaluation, presidential plan, responses and exhibits, independent investigator, NDSU faculty and student input, additional interviews, hours spent by our chancellor and assistant staff, I believe you all have had the information and time to each form our conclusion. It is time to make that decision and add this to our regular agenda, and in the spirit of fairness, total openness and transparency, not in executive session, to discuss and vote on a motion to renew Dr. Brashani's contract at North Dakota State University.
Thank you for your words, Dr. Melliker. Are there any further comments regarding the Perkins report? Are there any further comments? Hearing none, we'll move ahead on the agenda. The next item, assessment of the meeting and potential future agenda items. First off, I would like to begin by thanking the board for the discussion earlier today regarding tuition. I think this is exactly the type of discussion that this board should have, and I can think of few items before us that is more important than tuition to our students. And I thank the board for the discussion. I think this is exactly the responsibility that is put before us, and we have handled that. I'd also like to thank all the IT groups here today at all of the locations. I think we're learning a lot. As we do each one of these distance meetings, we get a little bit better at them. I think our video has worked very well. I think we will continue to work on our audio. However, I do want to point out again that all the board materials are before all the board members. So we have this in advance, but I do like this format, and I congratulate our IT group, especially those right here at Bismarck State College. Dusty, Cole, thank you very much. Are there any comments from the board on the assessment of the meeting and also potential future agenda items? Mr. Ness?
Madam Chair, Chancellor, does it look like we'll have a December meeting, or where are we at with that?
Madam Chair and Member Ness, good question. I would lean forward that we plan on it for two reasons. Obviously, an election will have taken place. The legislative reorganization will happen. The new governor will have just come in, and the budget will be presented, and so I would say we should plan on it. And if it turns out that it isn't necessary, we can always take it off the schedule later.
Thank you.
Kevin Melliker, Christy, I'm sorry, I can't remember the date, the tentative date of the December meeting.
14th.
14th? Okay. All right, thank you.
Any further comments or questions on future agenda items?
This is Don Morton. I thought today's meeting was very good. I think it's leveraging technology, and it sure is saving the system a lot of money. There's a lot of people in the room that don't have to spend several hours driving, that can be back working on behalf of students. I think that's very positive. I think I would just encourage IT to, if we can get the sound thing, and we had the same problem with UND last time. If we could just kind of delve deeper into what the issue is up there, that would be very helpful. But I think the other sites, it sounds like there was an issue with Fargo, but with the new microphone, has that been okay?
I would say it's improved.
Okay, we just, I think it's a very effective way to meet, with the caveat that we do need to meet face to face, and if we can do that quarterly, and then plus our retreat, I think we'd be serving the system very well.
Mr. Morton, I appreciate that, because I wholeheartedly agree with you. I think quarterly meetings that we can go towards, at least aim to that direction, person to person. And speaking of which, I'll move on to future board meetings. November 16th, it is tentatively set at Bismarck State. I believe item on number 11, we have verified that. So we have confirmed that the meeting will be at Bismarck State in person. And then after that, perhaps go back to our distance meetings. I think this is a very efficient, cost-effective way for the system. Most of us are now at home and ready to go back to work. With that, the business before the board is complete, and the meeting stands adjourned. Thank you. Oh, excuse me.
Public comment.
I forgot public comment. Can excuse me. Okay, I will recall that adjournment. Excuse me, I did not ask for public comment. Is there anyone who would like to come before the board at this time? Hearing none, the business before the board is complete. The meeting stands adjourned.
Deputy?